Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Cavallo, and I am the Township Manager for the Township of Verona in Essex County. And I have the privilege of serving as an Executive Board member for the New Jersey Municipal Management Association. On behalf of the NJMMA Executive Board, our Executive Director, Alan Zalkind, and our President, Mr. Ray Cody, the Borough Administrator for the Borough of Madison, I want to welcome all of our attendees and the panelists to this Zoom at noon regarding the new marijuana cannabis legislation. For those of you not familiar with NJMMA, we are an organization of professional local government administrators and assistants whose goals is to improve the quality of local government here in New Jersey. I encourage everyone to visit our website, njmma.org, for more information about our organization. Also, a little plug for those members who have not yet signed up for our upcoming fall conference, which is being held Tuesday, September 14th and Wednesday, September 15th in Long Branch. I encourage you to please sign up. Anybody who is in need of a registration form, please reach out to Tom Kenny at Rutgers. Our conference committee, under the leadership of our Vice President, Anthony Ferrara, have been tirelessly developing an agenda that will no doubt be both exciting and informative. Before I introduce today's panelists, I want to give a special shout out to Michael Pelessier, who will serve as our technical moderator for today's event. And for those of you with professional certifications, CEUs have been granted by DLGS and will be distributed a short while after the webinar. Anyone wishing to ask questions of our panelists can do so by either typing their questions into the chat feature or by raising your virtual hand towards the end of the presentation, and you'll be acknowledged at the appropriate time. And now on to our panelists. We have Laurie Buckley, who is the Assistant Executive Director and the Director of Governmental Affairs at the New Jersey League of Municipalities. Laurie has been with the League since 2009 and joined as a legislative analyst before becoming Senior Legislative Analyst in 2010. During her tenure at the League, she has coordinated the Women in Municipal Government Committee, as well as the Finance Committee for the League's Legislative Committee. We also have Jonathan Bogaswa, a partner at CLB Partners. Jonathan served as the Chief of Staff to Essex and Morris County Senator and former Governor Richard Cody, which included the period that Governor Cody served as Senate President here in New Jersey. In addition, he has served on the legislative and municipal staff of Hudson County Senator and North Bergen Township Mayor Nicholas Sacco. Prior to those positions, Jonathan served as Deputy Chief of Staff to Senate President Cody and Research Associate in the Senate Democrat Majority Office. As a Research Associate, Jonathan served as the lead aide to the Senate Transportation Committee and Senate Labor Committee, representing the interests of Senate Democratic Caucus. Jonathan has served on various positions in local, legislative, and statewide campaigns, including the Deputy Executive Director of the State Democratic Majority Political Action Committee. And we have Sean Chapman, Director of Government Relations at Weedmaps. Sean serves as at Weedmaps. Weedmaps is a leading technology and software infrastructure provider to the cannabis industry. The company was founded in 2008 with a strong belief in the power of cannabis and the importance of enabling safe, legal access to consumers worldwide. Since then, Weedmaps has worked tirelessly, not only to be the most comprehensive platform for consumers, but to build the software solutions that power businesses compliantly in the space, to advocate for legalization, social equality, and licensing in many jurisdictions, and to facilitate further learning through partnering with dozens of subject matter experts on providing detailed, accurate information about the plant. Weedmaps' mission is to power a transparent, inclusive global cannabis economy. Now in its second decade, Weedmaps has been the driving force behind much of the legislative change that we've seen during the past 10 years. And without further ado, I turn it over to Laurie Buckley.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for having me on this noon Zoom on cannabis. I look forward to hearing what my other colleagues are going to be saying shortly. I am going to go through some information a little quickly to leave enough time for questions at the end and for the other panelists. My presentation I'm going to share with Ray and Matt so it could be emailed to the participants on today's call. First off, I want to overview that there are 4 laws that determine how recreational cannabis is going to be regulated in New Jersey. It's Public Law 2021, Chapter 16, which is known as the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Enforcement Assistance Marketplace Modernization Act. You may hear the acronym called CREAM, or CREAM. That's that bill. Then there's Public Law 2021, Chapter 19, which regraded and decriminalized certain future marijuana and hashish offenses. Then there's Public Law 2021, Chapter 25, which is the first cleanup bill regarding underage possession or consumption of marijuana, hashish, and alcohol. The next one is Public Law 2021, Chapter 30, which is the cleanup of the cleanup bill regarding law enforcement to provide written notification to parent and guardians of folks under the age of 18 who commit first offense of unlawfully possessing or consuming alcoholic beverages, cannabis, marijuana, and hashish. So when you look at the laws, you have to look at all 4 together. We're still waiting for some place to meld them into one document to make it user-friendly. And when that happens, we will certainly let you know. So those are the 4 laws governing recreational use of cannabis right now. So let's get into a little bit of the meat and potatoes. There are 6 classes of licenses. You have a cannabis cultivator, that is someone who grows, cultivates, or produces cannabis in New Jersey and sells it. You have cannabis manufacturers, again, someone who processes cannabis items by purchasing or otherwise obtaining usable cannabis, manufacturing, preparing, packaging cannabis items, and selling. The next license is cannabis wholesaler. They are the purchasers or otherwise obtain, stores, sells, or otherwise transfers cannabis. Cannabis distributors, license 4, which transports cannabis items in bulk interstate from one licensed cannabis establishment to another licensed establishment. The next license is Cannabis 5, which is your retailer. They purchase or otherwise obtain usable cannabis from cultivators and cannabis items from manufacturers or wholesalers and sells them to consumers. You may use a cannabis delivery service or a certified cannabis handler for off-premise delivery of cannabis items and related supplies to consumers. And they must accept a consumer purchases to be fulfilled from its retail store that are presented by a cannabis delivery service to be delivered to the consumer. And the last item is a cannabis delivery service. They transport cannabis items and related supplies to the consumer. This includes a licensed cannabis retailer of any third-party technology platform to receive, process, and fulfill orders by consumers. The best way to describe this is the DoorDash of cannabis. I don't know if Sean or Jonathan will know of a company that's already doing this and what snazzy name they came up to, and apologies to DoorDash if they're upset by that analogy. So those are the classes of license. The law for the municipal level, the law allows for a cannabis tax. You can enact a cannabis tax by ordinance. That tax cannot exceed 2% on cannabis cultivation, manufacture, or retail, and cannot exceed 1% for wholesalers. And the percentage is based on the receipts of each sale. Your ordinance is going to outline how the tax will be paid to your finance officer, because the tax will be paid directly to the municipality. Any delinquencies in a cannabis tax is treated as the same as delinquent property taxes, but it does not, the tax cannot apply to transfers involving distributors for purpose of bulk transportation or delivery services for consumers. You cannot tax those 2 elements of the cannabis delivery system. So that's the tax, local tax you can enact. The licensing process. Individuals interested in having an establishment in your community will have to submit to the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, who has just begun to meet a couple of weeks ago. They're already at their 3rd meeting, but the Cannabis Regulatory Commission is the best way to put it is almost akin to the alcohol beverage control, right? A lot of this should look familiar because it's sort of following to some extent similar tracks. But the license process is the person submits to the Cannabis Regulatory Commission They then forward the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, then forwards a copy of the application to the municipality within 14 days. The municipality then has to determine whether the application complies with local restrictions on times of operations, location, manner, and the number of cannabis businesses that you may have in your municipality. A municipality must inform the commission whether the application complies with the local restrictions on those 4 areas. Again, it's times of operation, location, manner, and the number of cannabis businesses. And then the commission must approve a license that meets the requirements of this law unless the Cannabis Control Regulatory Commission find by clear and convincing evidence that the application would manifest unsuitable to perform the activities for the license class sought. So they have a very narrow window in which they can deny an application. So your municipal ordinances. First off, let's start. Any ordinance that your municipality may had prior to the passing of these laws back in February is now going to be null and void. So 2 years ago, if you adopted an ordinance prohibiting cannabis establishments in your communities, they are null and void and you have to start from scratch. Now, with that said, no, this law doesn't require you to enact a municipality, to enact an ordinance. It only allows you to enact an ordinance that governs the times, operation, location, and number of businesses you want in your community, establish civil penalties for an ordinance in violation, and permit consumption areas for retail licenses with the municipalities. If you don't do anything, you're automatically, the establishments will automatically have the right to be considered permitted uses within your municipalities, which I'll get to in a moment. So if you want to do an opt-out ordinance, so if you want to consider, listen, we're okay with one establishment, but we don't want the other, or we want to wait and see what's happening with the Cannabis Regulatory Commission before we enact, you have 180 days from February 22nd to do so. So that puts you about around August 22nd. You can opt out or prohibit one or more types of cannabis businesses. Otherwise, your class 1 through 4 licenses, which if you remember earlier, are your cultivators, manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors, they would be permitted use in all industrial zones in your community. Your class 5, which is your retail establishment, would be considered conditional use in all commercial zones in the retail, in all commercial and retail zones in your communities. Then you have to wait. You can't do anything for 5 years. And then after 5 years, you can then opt out. So there's a lot of confusion around this 5-year period. And there's different schools of thought. And I'm curious to hear Jonathan or Sean have a difference on this. In speaking with Senate President Sweeney's office, the intent was they wanted to make sure that if you opt in, the businesses had time to sort of work things out, right? So you couldn't opt in and then 6 months later go, oh, we made a mistake, we're out. So that's why you have that 5-year window that you're committed for the 5 years. But you are allowed, and this is where there's different schools of thought, you are allowed, and it was always their intention, that you can say, wait a second, we're not certain, let's wait and see, look at our community, what will work for our community, let's see what the Cannabis Regulatory Commission has to say, because the one thing to keep in mind too is during the same 180-day period that municipalities have to decide whether or not they're going to allow the establishments and such in their communities, the Cannabis Regulatory Commission has to draft the regulations. So at this point in time, municipalities are not certain what those regulations are looking like. So you may want to say, you know what, for now, we're going to opt out, but you can opt in at any time. And the intent was always to allow you to come in. It was never, but the concern was why there's the 5-year window is they didn't want you in and then jumping out quickly, and the business owners, they're like, what do we do now? So we've had attorneys from the Institute of Local Government Attorneys, our in-house counsel, look at the statute, and you can opt out, for example, now in 2021 and decide in 2022 that you want to allow retail, but not distribution and cultivation. And then you can decide in 2023, you know what, we might want cultivation in our community. And then you can opt into that as well. That's what I know there's some conflicts on that, but that's what our attorneys have said before the meeting. It was asked if we could get a written opinion from OLS. We're going to submit a request and we'll keep you informed what happens there. The other thing I want to bring to your attention in regards to municipal ordinances, the law did repeal statute NJSA 40:40A-1.2, which effectively prohibits municipalities from adopting an ordinance prohibiting underage consumption of alcohol and cannabis on private property. So if you have that if you have codified that in your municipal code or have that ordinance on your book, that statute has been repealed and that ordinance thus is no longer in effect. Another area we get a lot of questions on is the drug-free school zones. So the law changed the definition of controlled dangerous substance in New Jersey's Comprehensive Drug Reform Act to preclude legalized cannabis. So that means a licensed authorized cannabis facility may operate within 1,000 foot of a drug-free school zones. However, while New Jersey no longer considers cannabis as a controlled dangerous substance, federal law still continues to identify all forms of marijuana, including medical, as a controlled dangerous substance. So why it wouldn't be in violation of the state law, it could be in violation of the federal law. So we suggest you have that conversation with your municipal attorneys. The laws also addressed underage consumption and possession. Effectively, there has to be underage consumption of alcohol, marijuana, hashish, or cannabis, possession or consumption. There's first, second, and third violations. It starts with the written warning. The cleanup did now have a notification to the parents or guardians, which it didn't have previously. So at the first violation, the parent or guardian is notified. Second violation, again, is a written warning, but then they get information materials on social services. And then the third is not only the write-up, but the write-up warning also comes with the referral to those social services. Anyone under the legal age is not capable of giving lawful consent to search to determine possession or consumption violations, and they cannot be transported to the police station, headquarters, or other place, or taken into custody except to the extent that the detention is necessary to get the information to write the written warning or the write-up. A police officer is not permitted to request a consent search. Odor would not constitute a reasonable articulate suspicion to initiate an investigatory stop. Probable cause to initiate search of a person or the personal property in plain sight would not constitute probable cause to initiate a search of person or the property. So I have now given you a lot of information in a very condensed period of time. We do have resources. If you go to njlm.org/cannabis, that's our entire page devoted to cannabis resources, and that is updated. It also includes a link to the Attorney General Marijuana Decriminalization and Legalization resource page, since that is a very important topic for towns. And if you did attend our conference in November, I will make a plug to go back and review the Mile High experience, where we had officials from Denver that gave tips and discussed their process of legalizing marijuana. And I think there's a lot of tidbits of information that will be helpful to municipalities. So with that, Matt, I thank everyone for the time, and I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Laurie. And now up is Jonathan Bogaswa from CLB Partners.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Laurie, thank you for those comments. I do agree with everything you said in your analysis. Some other things I'd piggyback on that towns should be aware of. Through the application process, there's a couple of check the box items that a company would have to submit to the CRC. One of them, just like in previous application rounds, is a letter from your zoning officer or your municipal council certifying that the location that the company is looking to operate in is in fact in the proper zoning location for those operations. and you still need the municipal support letter that has to be a part of your application. And what that support letter is actually saying is that we as a municipality support company X operating in location X, and that is what it says. And the law is vague on how you represent that municipal support. All it says is that it may be done via resolution of the town governing body. Of course, a lot of the applications in the previous rounds went in with letters of support from the mayor or joint signatories from the council and the mayor. So there's different ways to do that. And I think that will also flesh itself out in the regs that the CRC will come out with. So you still need those 2 letters from a town to apply. I would also add, a lot of people probably heard about consumption lounges being allowed under the law. That is strictly opt-in. If you don't speak to it at all, someone is not allowed to have a consumption lounge in your municipality. You have to proactively, through your ordinance, say, we are going to allow consumption lounges. Some other things, when anybody applies to the CRC, they're supposed to notify you within 14 days if a company applied and they listed your town as the location. And it's really then incumbent upon you to then follow back up with the CRC to tell them, yes, we've been in talks with them, and reaffirm the letter from the zoning officer, the municipal support letter, and also affirm that they're in compliance with your ordinance and if you have a local license process. Additionally, if through your ordinance you put a cap on any of the licenses, well, you say you only want 1 retailer, 2 retailers, and more than that amount apply to the CRC, which is allowed, and you can allow that happen. The CRC is supposed to ask you your preference, your order of preference of the applicants, in case after the scoring, both, if you only allow 2 and 3 applicants that apply to your town, they all score the same number. They're supposed to give consideration. They're not beholden to it, but consideration to the town's preference in order of who you want to operate there. And the last thing I want to add about the town ordinance, you have the option to do a local licensing process. So you can just do an ordinance, or you can also add in another layer of the local licensing process, which I think, Laurie, you might have mentioned that, I apologize, which talks about where you can really get into, I think, more control under the manner of the establishment that you're going to allow in your town. And I think that's why that, in my opinion, I think that's why it's important to do the local licensing process. Also to give you some leverage, because you're on the ground, you're there every day. And if an operator isn't abiding by the terms of how they said they were going to conduct business or the state law, you're going to be there and you're in a better position to pull a local license and pause their business. And the state is who's in trend and needs time to send out inspectors. So that's what I wanted to add on in terms of the local aspect that Laurie talked about. I would say now more than ever, yes, you can certainly prohibit, opt out, opt back in, but there's not going to be a better time than now for a municipality to have leverage in talking with potential businesses. There's a lot of demand, a lot of interest to get into this New Jersey market. And the more time that goes by, prime locations get taken. The market expands. It's not that there's the first market mover advantage that people are trying to obtain isn't going to be there any longer. And the way you leverage that, and I think it's good for everybody, is when you're talking to these companies. I have several things that I think every municipality should ask. And if you don't get the right answer you're comfortable with, or if they won't disclose it to you, that should raise question marks. You should ask about the whole ownership team, not just the majority owner. I believe you have a right to know everyone who has an equity interest in that. You should ask what their industry experience is, and also understands they might not have any industry experience. This is a new industry, but then what type of background are they bringing to the table that's maybe analogous to this? And if it's a complete entrepreneur, that's okay too. Who are you working with that's going to help guide you along the way? You'll want to know that. You should ask about what their workforce development plans are. The way the application works, it's a graded application. So there is an emphasis on employees coming from certain communities. But even if you're not in that community, you should certainly have that conversation about what their plan is about hiring locally. It's still important. You should discuss with them, of course, what their security plans are. Make sure they're talking with your law enforcement. You want that to be a good relationship, an open relationship. And I find that it always is. You should also talk about what their community engagement plans are. Certainly it's joining with maybe area nonprofits and how they're going to work with them. If there's any charities they plan on being involved in, just things like that. You really want them to be a partner. And I think you'll find everyone's eager to do that. Everyone knows that this is new for everyone and they want to be a good neighbor. I know, especially with dispensaries, they have days where they open it up for community events having nothing to do with cannabis. They have days where, the attorneys that work with them, they offer pro bono services for different things that the community needs. I would say it's an open book. You should also think about what you want, like what you envision when you close your eyes of what a good business and a good neighborhood partner is, and lay it out on the table. And I think you'll be surprised that you're gonna like what you hear. Certainly get it in writing. Everything should be in writing because you want to hold them to that, and I think that's very acceptable. So I think those are really the things for you to think about when you're talking to prospective companies that come to you. I would also say when you do your ordinances, there's the 6 different licenses that Laurie talked about. If there's one you're not comfortable with, maybe you're open to the other ones. A lot of these types of operations, they do happen in industrial areas, warehouse areas. It's not something where someone's just walking by and they're ever going to see. In terms of the dispensaries, which obviously is the one that everyone talks about, over the last 5 years, and maybe even longer, I could say very comfortably, 98% of all dispensaries that are opening up in the United States now, they're one of two things. They're either pristine, clean, and white, and they look like an Apple store, or they look like your Main Street downtown coffee shop where people are sitting outside reading a book and working on their laptop. I would strongly encourage, and I know Sean, who's speaking after me, will probably echo these comments, to do a little research, see the type of operations that are opening up around the country, reach out to your colleagues in other states. We can certainly facilitate, videos and Zoom calls and whatnot, but it's an atmosphere that's very welcoming and opening, and that is the state of the current industry. So I just hope that everyone keeps that in mind. So I appreciate the time, and I look forward to answering questions later.
And thank you, Jonathan. And finally, Sean Chapman. And for those of you that are submitting questions via the Q&A, I am seeing them, and once Sean is done, I'll go through them with our panelists. Sean?
Fantastic. You can hear me all right. I assume I always like to do the technical check in the Zoom era. Thank you, Matt and Laurie and John. The vast knowledge between the two of you, I don't think that you can beat that. I mean, they obviously know this inside and out from the New Jersey perspective. So we're very lucky to have them here, and I'm very lucky to ride on their coattails because I certainly do not have that same depth of knowledge on this particular piece of legislation. What I do have is the experience working in a broad breadth of states, countries, and federal government. So my purview is the Eastern Seaboard for Weedmaps and the federal government in Canada. I hope I bring some of that perspective to you all today. The first thing that drew me to working at Weedmaps, I spent most of my career in clean distributed energy, and then I joined Weedmaps about 3 years ago. And the thing that I like so much about working for the company and what drew me to this particular company in the space is that the shorthand way that I describe what Weedmaps is and does and where most people interact, it's like the Yelp of the legal and regulated cannabis space. So just like you would go to Yelp to look for your favorite burrito or tomato pie, you might go to Weedmaps to look for what works for you, what products you maybe sample the product somewhere. And when you are visiting Colorado, you want to see if you can find the same kind of thing here. And that's how most customers interface with us. And what I really like about that in working in the cannabis space is that makes us a menu. And menus are only interesting if there are many items and many different types of items and different ways to access it. One thing that I'm really proud that we do and support is if there's a social equity applicant provider and business in there, you can filter out and look for those if that's something that you want to support when it's legal and accessible. So that's kind of a little bit about our business and what makes us so interesting. The other thing I want to also say is that I think meetings just like this one are incredibly useful and important. And I think you all are doing the exact right thing that you should be doing right now, listening and learning and talking amongst yourselves and following the league and the Municipal Managers Association, the Conference of Mayors. They're all having this discussion and doing it in a thoughtful way. I obviously work for a company that specializes in cannabis tech, so I'm a homer for the industry, but I have no disillusion about the fact that cannabis was prohibited in 1937. We want to say Governor Murphy was elected in 2017 on a platform. One of the things on his platforms was legalizing cannabis in 100 days. No commentary on that, but so we're talking about 80 years where this product was talked very differently in your communities, extremely differently. I'm of a certain age, so I remember the Different Strokes episode, the Punky Brewster episode, Nancy Reagan telling us all to just say no. And that doesn't go away just because we passed a bill, that sentiment. And we have a lot of education and learning to do together. So we hope to be a part of that. And we're not a fly-by-night tech operation, even if it sounds like we are. As Matt pointed out, we've been around since 2008, and we hope to be here in 2028, still having these conversations and listening and learning. One thing that I really liked from Laurie's pointing out was that one of the bills is called CREAM. Now, I am of a certain age, as I mentioned, and I've spent 20 of those years in Brooklyn, neighboring Staten Island. So CREAM to me stands for cash rules everything around me. And I think that's one of the things that's why we're having this conversation, right? And it's the balancing of making sure that the resources and the great opportunities that your communities can see from this are also balanced with incumbent town and municipality values, and that they are aligned and that Venn diagram matches in perfect harmony. So just a couple of statistics I'm going to run through and just things to point out that other places have seen, and then we can really get into the nitty-gritty on how it worked and operationally on that Q&A. And anything that I say or like a stat or anything, I will absolutely send to Matt and follow up with all the links so you can get that actual data. And I certainly prefer statistics that aren't from cannabis companies and all of that, because of course we have a certain point of view, but these are ones from other types of resources. The one thing to point out is the Mayor Laurie Lightfoot of Chicago. They were facing a budget deficit, which meant they were going to have to lay off 350 employees. And then enough revenue, unexpected revenue from cannabis helped them save those jobs during the pandemic. So that was like a very big crystal clear moment of what this industry could do. Glassdoor has done a lot of work on some of the growth in the industry. They estimate that we're the industry right now is somewhere north of 350 or 400,000 jobs working in cannabis right now. During 2020, of course, when we had one of the biggest unemployment crises since the Great Depression, cannabis industry saw a 32% increase year-on-year growth. Some economists have projected that we're talking about 20,000 new jobs in New Jersey by 2025. That's certainly going to be a factor of how it's implemented and the pace at which things can open and participate, but that is one projection. So those are some of just the job numbers, and including these jobs are not, they're good paying jobs. I mean, a lot of them are union based, not all of them, but many are. Certainly will be a strong contingency of that in New Jersey. And these jobs are, roughly, again, according to Glassdoor, about 10% higher than just the median wage for comparable industries and sectors. And I think the other thing that most municipalities are concerned with, and I'll get to the last one, and this one, it surprises me still, but that there isn't a corresponding increase in crime. And this is from a white paper done by the Justice Quarterly. So again, a third party validator on that, that there, since legalization in both Washington and Colorado, and those two states bicker with each other about who was first, but they legalized in 14 or 15. And since then, there has been little to no increase in crime. There seems to be some correlation with a decrease in violent crime, which I think is certainly important. And the other is a statistic, a big concern is property values. Obviously, it's a big concern in New Jersey. Property taxes are amongst the highest in the nation, and but the values have increased in municipalities that have legal cannabis versus those that do not. We're looking at somewhere around, it's from Cleaver, $22,000 of an increase on the median home value in those against the peers that are not legal. The biggest thing that I think you're all going to have your town meetings about, this is going to be the curveball, is going to be traffic. That is going to be that. And that to me kind of brings a smile to my face. I know traffic is a thing that everybody's concerned about and always worried about, and is certainly a major concern in the Garden State. I drove through some this weekend, and that's a big one. But that to me just speaks to the demand and the interest and the excitement around this industry. So those are some of the resources that we have that bring to bear. I will certainly send any of those on to Matt afterwards, and happy to answer any questions that we've seen from whether it be nearby Massachusetts, sort of what New York is doing and how they're leading right now, and the race is on between the two states to get that enacted, or Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, California, Canada, any of those things.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you to all our panelists. We do have a couple questions. Anybody who has additional questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A box, or you can raise your virtual hand. I believe we, yeah, so everyone, if you could just rate, yeah, I will start asking some of the questions. I believe the first one is directed towards Laurie. And Laurie, you said that the ordinance can identify the number, times, and location of the marijuana related businesses. Can the ordinance define a local license fee, and is there limits? If so, is there limits to some license fee, similar to the ABC renewal of a license? And I don't know if this is a Laurie question or a Jonathan question or both.
If Jonathan, I could take that if you would like. So there can be a local licensing fee along with the application fee. And there's no limits on those either, like alcohol beverage control has those max on those license. But like any application fee cannot necessarily be for revenue purposes. You know how we have that ordinance that say your fees have to be to cover the cost of administering the license. So we just caution that.
Okay. Jonathan, if a town passes an opt-out ordinance but doesn't provide either a letter of support that you mentioned, does that mean the applicant will not satisfy the application requirements and won't be able to get a license? Or is it then at the discretion of the CRC to grant a license, since your ordinance does allow for cannabis? Or I should say, your ordinances are moot on the fact of allowing cannabis.
I'm going to assume the town will pass some sort of ordinance, and they're just not opting out. My read is you have to submit with your application those 2 letters I mentioned, the one about zoning and the municipal support for your company's operations in the specific location you're applying from. That's there's a handful of check the box things your application has to have that they're not about being graded by the commission. You have to have it, and I would say they would not be able to get the license without that.
Again, it's probably wait and see where the CRC requirements and regulations come to. I'm not sure who's going to be able to answer this. When you're interviewing marijuana-related businesses regarding their banking references, is there anything we can ask to ensure that there are no large cash movements within the town? If they do not have one established, let's say a banking relationship within the municipality, and we want to require that to avoid any issues with the Bank Secrecy Act.
Well, I'll take a stab at that. More and more, there's banks that are in this space and working with companies, so that's good. I think the individuals referring to stories from several years ago, which is true, because you had nowhere to put your money, so you had these, whatever day it was, you were going to be transfers and the security issues that had to deal with that. The best I can say is there are a decent amount of banks now working in this space, and with a little bit of due diligence on potential operators' part, you can find out who they are, and then they have their own screening process, of applications, and you have to sit with them and go over things. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that.
I'm happy to add just a little bit. I think we can confirm that what John says is absolutely true. I mean, a lot of that has been mitigated in large part on the local level, especially where particularly cooperative banks and credit unions and things of that nature are really getting heavily involved. So it's actually a benefit to this more locally minded banking. But it's still something that we're keeping an eye on at the federal level. The Safe Banking Act is still up for consideration in both the Senate. It's already passed the House overwhelmingly. With strong Republican support as well, and it's up for consideration in the Senate. But comprehensive reform is still needed this on the federal level for sure. There's no question about that. But the banking question has been mostly solved and taken care of in that. So the large movement of cash is not as big a concern as it was 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Okay. And the person who actually asked this question has his hand raised. So Michael, if you could let him speak.
Go ahead and unmute, Stephen.
Hi. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think you missed my point. I know there are several banks in New Jersey. In fact, I've helped clients get them. But all I'm saying from my municipal point of view, sitting on council, what I'd recommend that if they don't have banking references, we should avoid the MRB, because it'll raise issues with the Beneficial Owner and Bank Secrecy Act and other. It's usually a red flag. At this point, if they've got good references, I'd be fine with that, because that's telling me that they have been free from issues or problems in the past. And if they don't have them when they're coming to you, then you will have an issue with potential with cash if they can't get one, because some problem with, as you mentioned earlier, with ownership and the entity and the other requirements. Anyway, that's all I was trying to make. Thank you.
All right. A question from our president. And I don't think we touched on this, but if you opt out, can you prohibit delivery service in the community?
No, you cannot prohibit delivery service. Just like you cannot right now prohibit delivery service. Again, I'm picking on DoorDash and Grubhub, but a town can't prohibit DoorDash or Grubhub from delivering the community, and the same will apply with cannabis.
Okay. Are there any financial models of successful cannabis businesses that towns can use to estimate their tax revenue that they would be able to, that they will be bringing in if they allowed for cannabis related businesses.
Sean, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have some. We certainly have some of that data. I will make sure that follow up with that just to so you get. I think you're looking for a specific model, and we can certainly find that. It's not coming off the top of my head. What I can say is that California, for instance, is a place where they grossly missed their targets and projection values in the very early stages. And this was a twofold problem: was that they overtaxed it at the state level in a way that they already obviously just had a robust illicit market for years and years and years, decades, right? I mean, the most famous maybe in the world. So if you're asking people to transfer from that is readily available, always been the node to go there, overtaxing them on the same product is just not going to work. And the other was just a massive opt-out from communities. I think we're still looking at 70% of municipalities in California have still not adopted ordinances to move forward to allow cannabis businesses and facilities. So that just means you're just not going to hit your projection targets. So they can get a little murky because there's so many factors that get in there. But I think there are probably some nice, let's say, some handsome models, some good-looking models and good models. As an economist, I when I say models, I mean something different that could project those out for a town, and we'll certainly follow up with those.
Thank you. And I think we also have, New Jersey, you have to think about us with municipalities. We have very conservative budgeting laws. So we're not going to be able to anticipate that revenue most likely in our current year budget if we didn't receive it the previous year. So we can also have, hopefully by the time we would be anticipating this in our budget, we would have at least a year's worth of data.
And if I can add to what Sean has said, in doing our research, and if you go to our cannabis resource page on the right-hand side down at the bottom, you'll actually see we've created a document that shows you what other states were allowing for the taxes, the local taxes, and then some of them provide links that you can go and look. Again, Denver, if you go to Denver's cannabis website, they will actually show you how much revenue they're bringing in from the cannabis tax and such, so you can use that, and all those links are on our website. And Sean was correct. California taxed too high and actually drove the illicit market up. So then they went back and reconsidered their tax structure to try to balance that out.
Okay. Is there an anticipated date that the retail marijuana market will be available for public purchase in New Jersey?
Well, according to law, so the CRC has 180 days to come out their regulations, August 21st. At the same time, when they come out, that's their deadline. That's also their deadline to announce when they're going to allow adult use sales. But it can be no longer than 6 months after August 21st. So there's your window. I would probably say it's either Q4 or Q1 2022 is when it's going to be declared.
Okay. Laurie, this is going back 2 questions, I believe. We can't restrict the delivery hours. We can't restrict delivery service, but can we restrict delivery hours within the municipality?
I don't think so, because you can't restrict delivery services. So for example, think about it again, I use the food analogy because it's an easy analogy, but can you restrict the pizza delivery times in your community?
Uh-huh.
So it's the same type of, you can't restrict Amazon or UPS deliver your FedEx. It's the same concept.
Yeah, Laura's correct. And it says in the law, when it's talking about what you can and can't do in your ordinance, you can regulate the delivery. It says the CRC in their regs is going to come out with the regulations for delivery.
Okay, thank you. Will the medical marijuana licensing process be changing in the future with the institution of the Cannabis Regulatory Commission? And does a town opting out of recreational cannabis have an impact on how licensing for medical marijuana businesses will be considered?
Well, I think if you're opting out for adult use, you can still have medical. I mean, if that's something a town is contemplating, I would encourage you to make that clear in your ordinance of what you are accepting and what you're not.
Can towns that opt out of a program still obtain any money from the state with regard to marijuana?
Laurie, correct me if I'm wrong. My recollection was during the debate on all this is that if you opted out, you would not be able to get any of these targeted streams of funding from the state that are tied to this. That's what I remember.
And I would have to look into that and get back, because there has been so many changes along the way. And I honestly think we're at the point where it's silent on that. Yeah, I think that was their intent and part of the conversations, but I think the ultimate bill, but I will have to confirm that.
Yeah, and the one thing that I was just asked about it and I was thinking about it, I think that's all exactly right. I think if you opt out, probably not, but if you're in an impact zone, so in these economic impact zones, and you opt out, you still would receive funds. That was my read and understanding, but I'm probably getting back is probably the best answer.
Okay. Thank you. Sean, in addition to traffic concerns, have there been any odor control issues for distribution, manufacturing, cultivation facilities? And how have towns been handling them in your experience?
I was doing some typing on that, but I'm happy to answer it live. When it comes to retail, delivery, distribution, zero. I'm zero concerns, and like John pointed out, I think folks are just shocked at how much these retail locations that blend into the community. I mean, there's one right next to an old Friendly's where I grew up in Massachusetts, and Friendly's means a certain thing for people from Massachusetts, and it's very strange. It's like that was a Friendly's, and it just like blends in. So on that front, no. On cultivation and manufacture, yeah, there is some noticeability and something to take into consideration. Some people find that smells pleasant, others do not, but it's certainly something to think about and work with the provider to make sure that they have the appropriate HVAC and exhaust systems, and making sure that that it fits in where. But those types of facilities are obviously going to be in the places where the Garden State got its name from, as agricultural locations. They're not going to be in downtown Morristown for the most part.
All right.
If I can, Matt, add to that real quickly. Part of the requirements too is you can require an odor control plan, or have the applicant address how they're going to control the odor. And on the retail side of it, when you look at a cannabis retail shop, you should view it more as a quick check 7-Eleven type retail establishment, and not a Barnes and Noble or a Macy's or something where folks are going to linger a little bit longer. It's a in and out type establishment.
Okay. With regard to the consumption or smoking of marijuana in public places, one of our questions is that the understanding is that the individuals are permitted to smoke in any public place where cigarettes are permitted, i.e. parks or public right-of-ways. Is that correct?
I believe so. I think that is correct, but I'm answering in front of the two much better experts than I.
And I'm not certain, because that's been back and forth with the Smoke Free Air Act and such. Mm-hmm. There's been conversations back and forth. And I don't know if we have a clear answer on that yet.
Okay. Going back to the application process for a potential marijuana-related business, if the borough allows for only one and we have 3 that are submitted, and I don't even know if we have ever able to answer this question yet because the regulations haven't come out yet, and the municipality provides support letter to all three, will then the CRC decide who will get their license?
So, right, we still have to wait for regulations, but the law does contemplate this. So if you put a limit in your ordinance to 1 for dispensary and 3 companies that you met with, you like all 3 of them, yes, you can give your support letter to all 3 of them, because, you know, none of them may even score out and win. So you end up with none to hold. It's a graded application. But in an instance where the CRC grades them and, you know, it's apples to apples, they are supposed to check in with you and ask you your preference. And that is where you would be able to say it was company A we really like over company B. But they're not, I do have to say that my read is they're not beholden to that preference. They're supposed to take it under consideration.
Okay. All right. And that's all the questions that were submitted. I believe we have one more hand up. Michael, Joshua Brown, if you could unmute yourself.
I don't have the question anymore.
Okay.
Matt, if I could just clarify one comment about the smoking. If someone's smoking cannabis outside, the police can't stop you for that anymore. That's part of the decriminalization aspect of it. But then you have the smoke-free clean acts. So that's sort of where the confusion comes in.
Okay.
I just want to clarify.
All right. And before we finish, any closing comments from our panelists?
I'll just add one thing, and you know, people always ask, what's the revenue models? What does it look like? We know a lot of dispensaries have ended up becoming a stimulus to the areas that they've been operating. It's generated other businesses coming in. Even if to the extent you're not comfortable in your municipality of what probably is today the ideal location because of foot traffic and things are humming along, maybe you have an area in town that's a little downtrodden that you've always been trying to figure out how to jumpstart it. Consider this as an opportunity to take a chance on something and see how it goes on that particular street where you're never able to get anyone in there. Because we do find across the country, then all of a sudden other businesses over time start coming in because of the foot traffic generated by these establishments.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And I thank everyone for attending. It is just about 1 o'clock, so we've ended our hour, and look forward to seeing everyone again for a future Zoom at noon.
They all earned their credits. Happy to be here.
See everyone soon.
Thanks.